And this is from Genesis 24:40 through 46. But he said to me, the Lord, before whom I walk, will send his angel with you and prosper your way. And you shall take a wife for my son from my family and from my father's house. You will be cleared from this oath when you arrive among my family, for if they will not give her to you, there you will be released from my oath. And this way I came to the well and said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, if you will now prosper the way in which I go, behold, I stand by the well of water, and it shall come to pass that when the virgin comes out to draw water, and I say to her, please give me a little water from your pitcher to drink, and she says to me, drink, and I will draw for your camels also, let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son. But before I had finished speaking in my heart, there was Rebekah coming out with her pitcher on her shoulder, and she went down to the well and drew water. And I said to her, please let me drink. And she made haste and let her pitcher down from her shoulder and said, drink, and I will give your camels a drink also. So I drank, and she gave the camels a drink also. And all God's people said,
okay, so we're going to begin. This is the beginning of the series. And this is truly a formula or a dynamic for success. And I'll just say my disclaimer. I know that the marriage is a difficult thing. For lack of a better, it's a thing. And I know that any time we're dealing with this, I'm dealing with a lot of different personal histories, both with people here and in Fellowship Hall and those watching us via the internet. It is a difficult thing. But let me tell you this, and this is my disclaimer. Most of the time, it's not made difficult by what God does. It's usually made difficult by what we do or we lack in doing. Okay? So no fault finding, no finger pointing. I just want to deal with this dynamic of marriage because I think it's God's formula, really, for success. And I think that there is He uses it as a lesson. This is the primary lesson that God can use to teach us about the relationship that He wants to have with us and that we should want to have with Him. And so we're going to begin. I know it's Labor Day, but you just sit back and relax. Don't labor over this. I'll do all the heavy lifting this morning, okay? So as we begin this sermon, I want to propose some things to think about, some questions I'm going to throw out here. And it doesn't matter if you're in this room or if you're in the fellowship hall or you're online. Stop and think about these. I'm going to give you just a second. But if you want to write them down and then mull them over as you go through your week, I encourage you to do that. But because I've done it this week and through this process of studying for this series. In fact, I posed a few questions as I was with my wife this week in the car. And so I'll throw this out here. Is marriage important? Is it important? We live in a day that really the world's telling us, culture tells us that marriage isn't all that important. In fact, if you listen to certain media outlets and read certain books and you listen to a certain voice in camps throughout our culture, you will hear the idea that marriage is not that important. Do you think it's important? Why? It's kind of antiquated. It's outdated. Come on. I actually heard one guy say, well, marriage, and I don't know where he got his information, and I really don't care. But I thought as I listened to him, I am not going to go home and talk to this one about my wife, but I'll talk to it about everybody because then you can be my witness, see. But he made the mention that cows are not monogamous. Cows. And I thought, that's interesting. And he goes on to say, well, we're kind of like the cows. We don't have to be monogamous. That's not how we were created. Have you ever wanted to reach through the television or the radio and slap somebody silly? Because I don't know what his name was. I'm researching all this stuff, and you go through, you hear articles, you get YouTube, you get this, they got that. I'm reading articles. And then I thought this as he was talking. So who's the cow? I sure ain't going to go home and talk to my wife about this one. But see, there are people that have letters behind their names that will throw things out there like that. And there are other people in the world that because they have those PhDs or DGGs or whatever other letters in the alphabet they've got behind there, they think that these people know what they're talking about. And so we live in a world that says marriage isn't important. That's what the world would have you believe. It's not that important. Don't pursue marriage. Yet, here's the thing. 70%, these are statistics, 70% of the population, male-female population, adult population, in the United States will get married. 55 of that 70% will get a divorce. %40 of the 55% that got a divorce will get remarried. Don't tell me marriage isn't important. There's something that God places within us. You find it in Genesis chapter 4. When God puts man in the center of the garden, he looks back and he says, that's a good deal. I've got all creation, now I got man, I put him in the center of the garden, and he created, it says, that male and female of every creature on the earth, and he brought them to Adam, and Adam was naming them. What a job that was. That'd have been a great job. Now, I got to admit, Adam's a heck of a lot smarter than I was, because I would have never come up with some of the names that they came up with. But God looks at Adam, man, and he says it's not good that man's alone. It's not good. So he created him a woman. In this process, there's a couple of things. I'm not going to preach on that text right now. But in that process, when he created woman, he brought man to completion. You see, the idea, what drives us to be married as human beings, we are different creation than all of God's creation. Okay? Now, the redneck's going to come out in me here just in a second, because weather's going to start getting cooler this week. That's what the weatherman tells us. When you step out onto my deck early in the morning, and I'm out there with my dogs, and I can still hear possibly the rustling, or I can hear the cows off in the distance, some of them bawling. Every once in a while, I might hear a coyote. And that cool air makes a chill go down your spine. And you know the next thought that runs through my head? Can anybody imagine?
Where's my coat?
No. That would be a thought that goes through your head, Amy. Where's my coat? Anybody else want to venture a guess besides Amy? Deer season. There's the man. Way to go, Tori. Deer season. And deer, we hunt them in a process as they start, their instinct starts drawing the male deer to chase the female. It's an instinctive process for them. In the hunting terms, we call it the rut. You see, that's how God designed most animals. They go through, they have a distinctive mating season. Whereas man is different. We don't have a season. I can be attracted and drawn to my wife each and every day. I am each and every day. You see, that's the beauty of humanity, really, of how God created us. And so when we say that marriage isn't important, when the world says it's not important, it's going counter to what God says. God says it is important. And as we go along in the series, just hang out. Don't take everything personal, okay? I'm not speaking to anyone. I'm speaking to everyone. Okay? And so here's the other question. Here's some more questions. I know you're eager. You're waiting. She's eager. If it's important, how do we show its importance? If marriage is important, how do we show that it's important? Good question, isn't it? Yeah. College wasn't a total waste on me. I know how to ask questions. In fact, I had classmates that would come up to me and say, "Listen, we don't want to do that assignment. Talk to the professor. Ask questions, Jeff." I can ask questions about Greek all day long because it's all Greek to me. Yep. Thanks, honey. You complete me. You see, no one knows. How do we show? If it's important, how do we show it's important? What other things are important to you? Family. How do we show they're important? Do things for them. Okay. Anything else? Is that all we do? Friends are important. How do we show they're important? Go to breakfast with them. Your relationship with Christ is important. How do you show that? Worship and prayer, constant prayer. Anything else important? We're kind of lacking on that, aren't we? We say that there's a lot of important things to us, but how do we show, how do we prove their importance? What evidence? If there was evidence that had to be presented, what evidence would be presented? If evidence had to be presented that your wife or husband was important to you, what would be the evidence that you would present? If you said, well, I put up with them, that's no, that's not right. That wouldn't necessarily be evidence that would acquit you. That might be evidence that would condemn you. Yeah. So we got to work through this thing. So you think about that one. If it's important, if it's so important of a decision about marriage, what are we doing to assist our children in the process of finding a mate? We just went down a road that most of us don't want to go down. You see, a lot of times we just think our children are going to catch it. It's just natural. And it is tough. Let me tell you, if you're a parent here and you've ever talked to your kids about who they're dating, it doesn't go well most of the time. It went well for you, Sean. Don't worry about it, buddy. Anybody ever had that talk? You can remember. Some of you can remember when your kids were little, can't you? When I say little, teenagers, dating age. Did you have that? Have you ever had that conversation? Yeah? Yeah, still having it, yeah. We have those. We should have those conversations. That's important. Something to think about. I hope you're writing these down. How does our selection process compare to that of Abraham's day? This is the beauty of Genesis 24. This is a picture of a concerned father, Abraham. Now, Sarah, his wife, had passed away. Abraham, now, you guys remember how old Sarah was when she had Isaac? 90. Anybody here? Any of you ladies be willing at 90 to have a baby? No, I don't think. Yeah. And Abraham, he was how old? He was 100. He was 100 years old. Guys, can you imagine being 100 years old having a baby? I can't. The scholars, guys smarter than me, think that Abraham was about 120. That would have made Isaac about 20. Now, there are others who say that Isaac was 33 years old when he went up with his father because he carried the wood. You see, Isaac becomes a type of Christ in that scenario. Okay? But that's for another lesson. We're not going there. That's okay. Good questions. Not a bad question. But can you imagine 90 and 100 years old? I mean, my mom was 40 when she had me. And according to her, it was one of the best things that ever happened to her. That's according to her, isn't it? She called my wife. When Dawn turned 40, she called my wife, tried to talk her into having another baby. I grabbed that phone and said, "What are you talking about? You got the wrong number." She tried to talk my wife into getting pregnant at 40. What in the world? I told my mother there'd have to be a star and 3 wise men show up for that to happen. You see, so Abraham, his wife dies, Sarah dies, he purchases ground, buries her, he's grieving, he realizes that his time is dwindling. Now, this is the picture of a father and his thinking. And so if this is well beyond now, Isaac isn't, he is not what we would call a teenager. Okay? This is beyond him. Sarah was still alive when he went up on Mount Moriah. He went up there and to sacrifice Isaac. This is well beyond that. If I don't know. You've got scholars who debate. He might have been 20. He might have been 33. We know that he was a young adult male. There are those who believe at this point in time Isaac's about 40 years old. Never been married. Got to find a wife. So Abraham, realizing he ain't getting any younger and he's not getting any sprier, he calls Eleazar his lead servant, his trusted servant, Eleazar is beautiful. You want to have a friend like Eleazar in your life. Because Eleazar Abraham comes to him, and he calls him into his tent. He says, Eleazar, he said, I want you to make an oath that you will go back to my home country and find a wife for my son Isaac. I want you to take and put your hand under my thigh and swear that you will do this. Now that is the process. That was a covenant-making process. Now some of us here today, we don't live in the ancient world, and be quite honest with you, in modern society, a man or person, or man or woman's word is only as good as they're willing to follow through. But in that day, when you took an oath, you entered into a covenant relationship, it was binding. And I won't even go into the details of what it meant to put the hand under the thigh. It gets real personal. And we're not comfortable with that. But what he was basically saying is, when Eleazar was willing to do that, he says, will you make an oath? And Eleazar said, yes, I will, master. And he takes and puts his hand underneath Abraham's thigh, and he swears that he will do this for his master. And he says, when do you want me to go? He goes, right away, go fine. But he says, here's some conditions. Do not take Isaac with you. So Eleazar is immediately thinking, well, this is going to be a difficult task. I'm not to take him with me, but I'm to go find him a wife. Wouldn't your kids have loved that? Sitting at the breakfast table, pour them a little bit of Cheerios, milk over it, a little sugar to sweeten it up. Sit down, say, you know what I'm going to do today for you, because I think so highly of you and I love you? I'm going to go find you a spouse. Can I go with you? No. Trust me. You would have liked that, wouldn't you, girls? Yeah. So Eleazar has a task in front of him. I'm to go find my master's son a wife, but I can't take him with me. And Abraham was very adamant, do not take my son back to my home country, but do not allow him to take a Canaanite wife. Now there's some things that are happening here. Abraham's thought processes are pretty clear. One is, listen, he does not want his son to go back and to regress from where God had brought Abraham and his family. Listen, as much as I love my mother and my father in my life, much as you love your mother and father in your life, you don't want to go back and experience what they experienced. I do not want to go back and live where they've lived. I don't want to go back to the poverty that they had. I don't want to do that. And so Abraham doesn't want Eleazar to take Isaac back to his country. And we're going to find out why here probably next week. We won't get to it this week, but we'll find out next week. We know why Abraham doesn't want that to happen. The other thing that Abraham doesn't want is he doesn't want him to take a Canaanite wife. He is very adamant on that. Do not let my son take a Canaanite wife. In Abraham's mind, if Eleazar, because Eleazar asked some questions. He says, okay, what if I go there and I find a gal, but she's not willing to come back? Here's the level of Abraham's faith in God. If you find someone, but she is not willing to come back, if you find that person with all the criteria that she's not willing to come back, you are released from your oath and you can come back, but when you come back, do not let Isaac take a Canaanite wife. You see, Abraham had some expectations for his son, for his son's life. do we have those for our children today? Do we have them for ourselves? If I was to ask you to list your criteria or characteristics for what a godly life would look like, what would you write down? If I was to ask you to outline for me what being a godly husband or being a godly wife, what your expectations, even if you're already married, what are your expectations? Because the expectations, once we get married, those don't go null and void. You see? We're dealing with a process here that God put within us instinctively. If there's one instinct that we have as human beings, is that we crave another. We crave to have a relationship with another. Not with others. We have those. We have a lot of relationships, friendship, but everybody is looking for that one relationship. Johnny Lee, looking for love. Yeah, Johnny Lee didn't have it right. He was looking for love in all the wrong places, looking for love in too many faces. Abraham told Eleazar, and this is, I want to close with this. We're going to finish. This is just part one. We're just starting a series now, guys. So hang with me. But this is the level of Abraham's faith in God. Remember, this is the man who God spoke to back when he was living in Ur and said, "Arise and take your family and go to a land that I will show you." Where is that land? Well, I'm going to show you. Go to the land I will show you, and I will make you the father of many nations. He was well beyond at that time the age. Sarah was well beyond the age of bearing children at that time. When she becomes 90, she gives him a son. But the level of faith that Abraham had in God to know that he would release Eleazar from the oath if a woman that Abraham knew that God had a plan. He was willing to risk it with Eleazar. So, Eleazar, if she's not willing to come, you're released from your oath. But don't let my son take a Canaanite wife. Why? You have to come back next week and find out. Because those Canaanite women, they'll lead a man down the wrong path. You got to watch out for them Canaanite women. I'm telling you. You all know what I'm talking about. I didn't fall off the turnip truck last night, people. I have pastored in small communities, and I've heard this. I don't want my son dating anybody from over there in that town. It ain't gonna happen. Listen, the Hatfields and McCoys really happened. And I'll tell you this much too. I have seen it played out more than once, the whole scene of Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare he didn't just make that up. He saw from experience, and he just wrote what he saw. So, we're going to find out next week. And there's some principles here that we're going to derive from. But you got an assignment this week. I want you to think about those questions that I asked you. Marriage is important. If marriage is important, why is it important? Why is it important to you? Why is it important to you? Whether you're married or not, doesn't matter. If you're divorced, doesn't matter. Marriage is important. If it's important, why is it important? Now, here's the other half of that assignment. What are you doing? If you're a parent here today, what are you doing to prepare your children for the process of finding a mate? I spent 7 years as a youth pastor. One of my axioms that I taught my kids in youth group, whether they were junior high or high school. I always taught on dating once a year. Yeah, those were fun times. There's nothing better than when you're a youth pastor making kids blush. But I'd always say, a date is a possible mate. My wife finished the sentence. A date is a possible mate. And I made them repeat that. A date is a possible mate. I won't even begin to share with you what I taught them, what that phrase meant. It had more than one meaning. What are you doing as a parent to prepare your children? I don't care how old they are. I don't care if they're in the house or not. What are you doing to prepare your offspring? I'll put it that way, because children makes it sound like, 7th and 8th graders run around. And you need to prepare them. But what are you doing to help your offspring prepare for this process? Father, I thank you for the truth of your word. I just love how Abraham trusts you. He trusts you so much in this important process that he is sending his servant Eliezer on. He trusts you so much that he realizes that he is willing to risk it by releasing Eliezer from the oath, from a sacred oath that he makes with his master. He is willing to release Eliezer from his oath. But he knows that you are faithful. He knows that you didn't bring him this far to leave him flounder. He realizes that within his son and the relationship that his son has with his future wife is the promise that you made to Abraham so many years ago, starting out on that journey from Ur. Lord, I thank you because you made that same promise to us. If we here have read your word and stood upon the promises, those promises do not go null and void because you're faithful. The only way that they fail is if we fail to demonstrate our faith and trust in you. I believe that. They may take turns and they may look like they have come to a dead end, but if we just trust you, if we just trust you like Abraham trusted you, we realize that even the most sacred things in our life can be let go because you're faithful to your word. We can take that risk. Lord, I pray and ask that you would help us to be people who risk trusting you. Before we listen to the world and what they have to say, before we allow ourselves to be consumed with this world's wisdom from people who much of the time do not recognize or know you, the Almighty Creator of heaven and earth, and the one who saves men's souls and transforms lives. If they don't know you, they don't truly have wisdom. And so we trust you, we trust your word, and Lord, I pray and ask that you would help us to begin to think about this thing called marriage and the importance of it. There are young people here today who need to listen to this. Because if we just do it on our own, much of the time, we end up experiencing hurt and frustration. And so, Lord, I pray and ask that you would help each one of us to draw closer to you as we study this series and we study your word. Thank you for your truth. Thank you for your love. In Christ's name, amen. Stand if you would. We're going to sing one last chorus.
Room. Grab
612 in your hymnals.
In this very room, there's quite enough love for all like me. And in this very room, there's quite enough joy for one like me. And there's quite enough hope and quite enough power to chase away any gloom. For Jesus is in this very room. In this very room, there's quite enough love for all of us. And in this very room, there's quite enough joy for all of us. And there's quite enough and quite enough power to chase away any gloom. For Jesus is in this very room.
The very source of love. In fact, the Bible says that God is love. He is here. He's in this very room. And so, as you go throughout this week, I want you to practice being not only receptacles of His love, but also dispensers of His love to those around us. And you start with those closest to you. Father, your blessing upon them. Keep them. May they have a wonderful, wonderful time with family today, tomorrow. Lord, I pray and ask your blessing. Draw us closer to you. And all God's people said, Amen. You are dismissed.